What's up, babies? It is 110 days of this bitch. Are you sure? I think so. Word, dog. How you living, pimp? Whatever, my eyes are all fucked up. 31, creation of the world, birth of Adam and Eve, Chava. 36, 31, 130, Seth, son of Adam, was born. 35, 26, 235, Enosh, son of Seth, was born. You gotta add to this motherfucker. Really? Oh, for sure, dog. Motherfucker, if I ever catch one of you listen to the Ghost Therapy app instead of watching my streams, throwing fists. Really? What the fuck? What the fuck is this shit? This is the worst. This motherfucker. I think. 34, 36, 324, Kenan, son of Enosh, was born. 34, 36, 325, Kenan, son of Enosh, was born. Yo. Really? For Rizzy? West Side. Motherfucker's gonna be just fucking lit. Right. Why? Reverse cycling, yo. Alright, are you done? No, that we've got a ton of other shit to review. Today's 28th of Nissan 5786, Wednesday, April 15th. What else? Dog, I got some other shit to review. Like what? Dog, it's the Omer, motherfucker. Why are you cussing so much? Why not? Record had an island map on the Shaka to Shana, but Mitchell Top at Tibano, Al Seferat Ha Omer. Blessed be Hashem of God, King of the universe, who has sanctified us with his commandments and commanded us concerning the counting of the Omer. Today is 14 days, which is 2 weeks of the Omer. Was son? Really? It's whatever you want it to be, baby. Are we done? Oh yeah, Eluve, Elu, Divrei, Elohim, Chaim. No one really knows for sure Eluve, Elu, Divrei, Elohim, Chaim, but this is the Missouri lived by. Alright. Oh shit. Oh, that's like heartburn levels of nastiness. Really? Oh, it's the worst. Now I've got to take a shit. Really? Sorta. Timeline of Jewish history. Biatch. $37.60.
Timeline of Jewish history. Jewish history spans nearly 6,000 years, beginning with the creation, approximately 4,000 years before. It continues through the eras of the patriarch, the Egyptian bondage, the First Temple era, when kings of Judah and Israel ruled, the Babylonian exile, and the second taken into exile yet again by the Romans. Throughout, Torah study and our faith in GD and his promise of redemption were our constant companions, providing the Jewish people with a divine compass through every challenge and change. Which era would you like to jump to?
All of them, baby.
Creation of heaven and earth, and Adam and Eve. The forefathers. Living in Egypt. Traveling through the desert. Judges and early prophets. Kings and the First Holy Temple. Exile in Babylon. Building of the Second Holy Temple. Greek cultural domination. Kingdom of Judea, Dynasty of the Shashmanaim. Roman client kings and rulers, the Herodian dynasty. The Talmudic era, the Mishnah. The Talmudic era, the Gemara. The Rabbanan. The Janim. The early Rishonim, the Crusade massacres. Later Rishonim, persecutions and expulsions. The great scholars of the Shulchan Aruch and Torah consolidation. Early Acharonim and East European massacres. Acharonim and early Hasidim. Later Acharonim and a changing society. The Holocaust.
Really?
The modern state of Israel. Traveling through the desert. Secular year Jewish year event in history. Minus 1313 2448 the Jewish nation crossed the Red Sea. Minus 1313 2448 the revelation at Mount Sinai and the giving of the Torah. Minus 1300.
All that stuff is cool, but I gotta take a major shit. Oh wait, hold on. I knew it. I knew it. We did it last time. It would like didn't make, we started too early or some shit. No.
2448 Moses.
Again, dog.
Creation of heaven and earth and Adam and Eve.
Okay.
Secular year.
Gotta take a shit. Really? Really, Lily? Who the fuck is Lily? No one knows. This shit is the worst.
Do a lot of this, don't do any of this. Do this and avoid this. Ella, that says, well, of course that's true. Of course that's true. That's only one element. That's only one aspect. Ella, Horad, Horad, Adam. The accent, he says it is something about starting. It's a process of learning. And I will say, that's coming to the light experience. All experience, but you have something to transferable points. So I will say, you know what? The power of learning. What are the differences? It's not like an emphasis on learning. Like, why do you have this? Why do you have this? So of course, from one basic level, in order to be a teacher, you have to know what to do. Right? It's no different. You want to get your license. You have to study the driver's manual. You have to know, how many car letters you need in the car, the you in the car company, right? You need to know how many feet, how long you have to stop for the stop sign. You need to know the laws in order to pass the test. Right? You know the halacha in order to be a functional Jew. So they say, what happens in the what happens in the word? The process of learning is makes a more thoughtful and expected. It's a second person. So you want to say, we know this. It feels different when you learn. You just feel different. You just become a different kind of person. Now, that's because I know now what is better. I'm a better person because I know how to do Shabbos better because I'm learning the halachos of the lobby. Yes. Like, I know I'm a better person because now I'm learning you well. I'm going to know how to observe your people. That what we're saying over here. Something much more sound. Where the fighting becomes holy, was present for the spoken dynamics that allows you to be more introspective. And it's that spoken dynamic that allows you introspection, that allows you to see how to listen, we know this. We know this because you feel different after you learn. You know that he says, give the proof to this, the oracle proof. The H don't get I'm going to show you that learning has an impact that allows you to be a more introspective and thoughtful person. Even and not related per se to an enhanced knowledge of operational Judaism. What's the proof to this? This is incredible. Shahare, Gan Kisha Adam Lorid and Ine Seder Kutshim. המדבר בעניין הקבלות, הכל הקבלות. לקרוא בנחשב לו הדבר שהוא עושה בתורה. Let's say a person's very conscious. You don't say 90%. Spends a lot of time on the second skull. And then getting you up, we've had sugis again of Kabbalas. Don't want any Kabbalas. Right? Let's say in general, how do we relate to a sugi of Kabbalas? Hori Shekam as HaTorah more as Darkos, who might think how to keep them hanging as Darkos. As Shaznabar, Taylor, Milkea, East, who I see. You know, it's like, when I learn Kabbalah, for example, what's the relevance of sugi of Kabbalah to me right now? What's the relevance? None. No, what's right? You saw this. We're learning sugis and you love that today, Sunday class. What's the relevance right now? Right now, today, it's Monday. What's the relevance this moment? And the answer is nothing right now. Again, the answer should be nothing. We got third base and English. Hopefully, we're spending a lot of time. Right? That's what I hope. Right? So therefore, again, we will go ahead and get there. Hashem knows the layout. What I saw. Is there a takeaway for me? Okay, so there's a hashkafic takeaway. But is there a halacha l'maisa takeaway for me? And the answer often is no. But yet, I feel changed by learning. I feel changed by the learning. I am a different person. Yes, I am more thoughtful. I am more introspective. How does that occur? So if Torah was just operational, or if Torah at the end of the day was just to go ahead and teach me what to do or whatever, so then I would have learned from the Sudan culture, and I would say, all right, I mean, I just kind of like I spun my wheels a little bit, right? I didn't do anything. But the fact that I feel changed, and the fact that I feel different, and the fact that I feel that there's something that's sparked inside of me, even when I learn something that's not about myself, indicates to me the power of Torah. As already said, Hari Shekam, I will finish with this line. Hari Shekam, as HaTorah more is Darko. Ooh, Madricha also. Because what I'm saying, even when I'm learning something, and it's not about myself, or I'm learning something that doesn't have a it's practical, day-to-day application right from this moment. Goes on and says, nevertheless, Orlo is Darko, Machichos and Keats and attacking is not show. I'll shut over Eno Nokia the East the nice of the floor. So I will say that something close to get in so down. Just so kind, all of us are used to this emphasis on learning. So sometimes it's not explained to us why learning is important. So of course, there's an operational 2-hour learning. The operational piece for learning is I need to know what to do in life. I have to learn Yiddishkeit in order to know how to be a good practice and do. That's the power of learning. Is that it awakens us to our deficiencies. The power of learning is that it causes us to be focused. The power of learning is that it sparks and that irrespective of the day, which is study. Even if I'm studying something with my life so like definition sparks. That's the process of introspection. That's normally only sparked right here. It's incredible. What is the only time that it's normally sparked? When I sit, I use this incredible. That's really when this process sparks. When I do that, I realize, I am short-term. I need to work on that. If something says there's a way to jumpstart that process of introspection, even without the faith. That's cool. So it's not over here. We're going to pick up with this theme in the Arizona.
Join filmmaker Caroline Slaughter on the podcast as she uncovers the disappearances and death that have befallen Westerners who have taken a spiritual pilgrimage to India.
Don't go to India because this is a Venus flytrap for your vulnerability.
Listen to Astray on the iHeartRadio app or wherever you get your podcasts.
Disney has begun layoffs in an effort to streamline operations. The new CEO
All right,
put out
that's
a
good.
memo on executive reports. Say to see Apple is releasing 4 different types of smart glasses.
Remember again, we began this particular
The iPhone is launching the smart test program. model for the better raiment display process. Apple is likely to unveil its new glasses later this year with the 2027 launch in the works. And school districts looking to save money, and a county school board in Virginia has said no to the Fremont County School Board voted not to approve a 5-day school week to a 4-day one, saying they just did not anticipate the budget. A survey sent out by the division showed almost half of parents like the idea, and more than half of students felt the same. The parents were also concerned about childcare costs and food insecurity. Students said they would be worried if they missed one day. 26 states have adopted a 4-day school week if meant to research and try to change teachers by Garcia Romero. There's a tentative labor deal for thousands of city workers in San Diego as the city faces a major budget deficit.
Where every policy of that budget was projected $120 short. The three-year deal raises totaling 9.8% to hold out workers take 1 week furloughs in the first 2 years. incredible, wonderful, except
The start.
that they did a week to learn about my short without saying. And then it's a dance code. When I learned, again, I become more attentive to myself. When I learn, I become more respectful. When I learn, I have the ability to go ahead and recognize issues and shortcomings, even when you have the right chance of Palestine, and we may have read so definitely my government improvement strategy in the following idea. So for example, a woman's really and in a punch. And the dagger is in for example, even when a person is touched, that person out of the food this girl the actual from a government or they should have a moral or who like you from this sort of like to the bar. Even a person is touched, first one is Kabbalah. So I learned Kabbalah. There's nothing they say halach for the nice people. So if you assume that the power of Torah is that it tells you what to do and what not to do, the entire value of Torah it lives in the realm of being an instruction guide for what to do in front of you. Like, of course, Torah is part of Torah. Then what exactly do I get to touch? What do I get? What do I get from that? Elements is that you see that the power of Torah is such that even when I learn something that's colorful, not halacha or nice, in terms of the do's and don'ts in life, it comes out so nice and that it forces you to become more introspective, thoughtful person. I love the ability to understand. The key that I got is going to how he says the case of I can't drop it. Back to where the Prophet says, go see on you, the Astorah and Moshe. So the Prophet says, the Prophet the man is back. Obviously, they have left, go see on you, they have left me, so I see those Shabbat. And the reason also, if you think about it, it sounds a little bit redundant, right? If you say, oh, see how probably they left me, then of course I would take things like Torah. Same idea. If you say they would keep my Torah, that means they left me. So why does it doesn't have to say both things? Why did it have to say, oh, see how they left me? That's Torah side, no Shalom, they didn't keep my Torah. So it's kind of like for a woman, because he says it in Yachol, the Rebbe Shalom says, Halabai, O see on through the Sarah Shalom, while then trade from, you know what? Halabai, I wish that they had just left me, but kept my Torah. And I would say, what does that mean? You know, you know what? If they don't want a relationship with me, okay, I can live with that. But at least my Torah. Sorry, this absolute law of the worship law, not the opposite law. What the emotional would say was, if I was really prince and taking a relationship, I could have lived with that as long as they would have checked me. Because if they learning Torah under those circumstances, Torah will awaken the light. When a person learns, when a person learns, as we were saying before, they become a more perspective. When a person learns, they become more thoughtful. When a person learns, they're willing to encounter, they're willing to embrace their own shortfalls and deficiencies. That the father saw was only the left hand, and that they were kept learning by Torah. They were the only purpose personalistic rehabilitation. And the 12 will event the dollar trend. Oh, they left me, the Sora side, that's the Sora side of Shomorah. We stopped learning. And when a Jew stops learning, the entire vehicle of reflection and the entire vehicle of self-evaluation, it disappears. He goes on, he says, Shama or Shabbat HaTorah, or Hakmas HaTorah, there go, Lachim Mechashechas HaMisios. שנמצא בסיפוס היצרות, עד שחוזר לעבודת השם. What's very profound. Tzaddik writes, the wisdom of Torah has the ability to go ahead and literally illuminate one from the foolishness. By the way, but ultimately one finds their way back to the devotional. So once they see and realize the power of Torah things themselves. So we see it turns out that right from Tzaddik is only two elements to learn. There's the functional utilitarian part of learning, which is I learned Torah why. How is the functional tool I thought? Like, let's say, how do I keep Shabbat if I don't have a person? And how do I keep kashrut if I don't know if it's kashrut? Like, how do I wash my hands in the morning if I don't have a halacha? This is a functional piece. I need to learn Torah in order to be able to properly live as a Jew. This is an incredibly important piece. The part two says something. But it wasn't even noticed. This is one of these dynamics, right? People explain this way, try to explain it in words, but at the end of the day, they weren't going to get justice. Because it's a dynamic that you just have to experience in order to really understand this. The second dynamic is ultimately, again, when I go ahead and I learn, it opens my eyes. And it opens my heart. What? I feel like a different person. I feel like a different person. And I'm willing to respect. And I'm willing to self-evaluate. And I'm willing to engage in the process of self-judgment. And I'm willing to do all of these things that I can do to tackle my shortcomings and my deficiencies without having to sin. So we'll say, so what the building is positing is there are two ways to come to the process of self-evaluation. By possibility, one is I sin. And again, the great part of sin, but the great part of sin is I know what my weaknesses are, I know what my deficiencies are, I know what I have to do. But then there's the process of learning. And when I learn, I have the ability to go ahead and engage in the process of self-evaluation. Without sin, how does it work? Torah opens down. Torah was experienced the power. Torah opens my mind, allows me to self-evaluate, allows me to express, allows me to see me for who I am, both the good as well as the not so good. The learning of Torah fundamentally transforms God. Hamdam, the Hashba'az, Hashba'az, Ha'ala, Yish Kama like they go shop. So the rest of it today, the American Shabbat will go right there. He says, in this process of learning Torah in a self-evaluative or transformative fashion, there are different levels. He says, today, Sharatori of Yah, by the art of Torah, who Akune, Matina Yesur, who Matin in a feed, Matin is the heart of Lodia, Shimano, the was actually a prayer. Something said, Koto de represents Soto, and March Kaskan, Torah, Mikna, Torah provides two different aspects. Mikna means it protects us, or as you say, like a magnet, or it shields me, and Matzvah, it saves me. protects me and saves me. Now those two words, synonymous, in fact mean two different things. So Rashi, for example, says, Rashi says, Vigna says, Vigna means it protects me from certain punishments. For punishments, from suffering, then Torah has the ability to protect me from punishments and suffering. Matzvah saves me, has the ability to save me from the two different components. Torah has the ability to save me from suffering, Vigna, Matzvah from Yitzhak. So it tells you, we're going to see that it's going to say that these two aspects show you the two different dynamics within Torah. He goes on, Torah Majicha Asa Adam, Pizza, Ikon, Hakir, Nashos. The Dela Page, Shamashal, Mahaba, Arshava, Mahnes, of the Muda, or, stop over there for today. We'll pick up the next piece. But again, just to look at these dynamics, when we see that Torah Nikno is not what this is done. Great, that's very often, that's very often quoted about the power of Torah. Nikno saves me from the serious punishment of suffering, Matzvah, and it saves me from myself. Saves me from the desire. So a couple of different things. We'll pick up here to show what this dynamic is about.
Has come forward against former California Congressman Eric Swalwell. Monitors claims Swalwell drugged and raped her at a hotel in West Hollywood in 2018. Swalwell resigned from Congress yesterday and dropped out of the race for governor of California over the weekend. With Swalwell out of the race, Democrats have a new leader in the bid to become the next governor of California.
A new poll released this week from Survey USA shows Democratic candidate Tom Steyer leading with 21% of likely voters in the state.
We're starting to really focus on this election.
The top Republican in the poll is Steve Hilton.
Our Democratic voters, we need to go on and collapse to the future. Chaos is terrible. I think we're desperate for change in our head.
The top two candidates after the June primary will face off in November despite political party. Jason Campadonia, KFI News.
A man from Calabasas and his cousin have pleaded guilty to running a scheme that targets customers of Airbnb and other short-term rentals. Prosecutors say the pair would list the same property on multiple rental sites and then move customers who were double booked into less desirable property. Prosecutors called it a sophisticated bait and switch fraud operation. A new report says a $20 minimum wage for fast food workers is killing jobs.
The $20 hourly wage for fast food workers in California enacted in 2024 has been anything but a disaster, according to a UC Berkeley report. Research shows it didn't reduce employment, only resulted in a 1.5% price increase added on 6 cents to a $4 item, and restaurant revenues likely grew. That raise covered about 500,000 California workers in large fast food chains and snack and non-alcoholic beverage bars. Researchers say numerous articles critical of the wage increase rely on anecdotal evidence of job cuts and price increases. Mark Romer, KFI News.
Nearly 500 ducks are being put up for adoption. The ducks were surrendered to the Riverside County Department of Animal Services by a person who's being investigated for operating an illegal sanctuary in Anson. Officials say the site and the upkeep were determined to be inadequate, and the owner ultimately gave up the ducks voluntarily. Check and see what's slowing you down on 405. Next.
25 years ago, I built a house and wanted inputs for the dry food. And so I bought a system because, well, I and I still do. They are simply the best out here. So they did my neighborhood and my synthetic turf and landscape lighting. You go to that house, it's terrific. And they're doing my house now with turf how they were lighting. It's a neighborhood. Here is their offer. 50% off materials. That's call 800 PO 004 Visit systempavers.com/KFI. Systempavers.com/KFI. Visit the website for
Wow, Rabbi, so you spent like 30 minutes of this bitch just taken down, allegedly.
Jewish year event in history. Minus 3,761 creation of the world. Birth of Adam and Eve, Chava. Minus 3,631 130 Seth, son of Adam, was born. Minus 3,526 235 Enosh, son of Seth, was born. Minus 3,436 325 Kenan, son of Enosh, was born. Minus 3,366 395 Mehalil, son of Kenan, was born. Minus 3,301 460 Yer, son of Mehalil, was born. Minus 3,139 622 Chanak, son of Yer, was born. Minus 3,074 687 Metushalach, son of Chanak, was born. Minus 2,887 874 Lemech II, son of Metushalach, was born. Minus 2,831 930 Adam died. Minus 2,705 1,056 Noah, son of Lemech II, was born. Minus 2,225 1,536 Noah began the construction of the ark. Minus 2,205 1,556 Yafet, son of Noah, was born. Minus 2,204 1,557 Cham, son of Noah, was born. Minus 2,203 1,558 Shem, son of Noah, was born. Minus 2,105 1,656 Metushalach died. Minus 2,105 1,656 The great flood covered the earth. Minus 2,103 1,658 Arpachshad, son of Shem, was born. Minus 2068 1,693 Shalach, son of Arpachshad, born. Minus 2038 1,700, son of Shalach, was born. Minus 2004 1,757 Peleg, son of Heber, was born. Minus 1974 1,787 Reu, son of Peleg, was born. Minus 1942 1,819 Sirach, son of Reu, was born. Minus 1912 1,849 Nacharai, son of Sirach, was born. Minus 1,883 1,878 Terah, son of Nacharai, was born. The forefathers. Secular year Jewish year event in history. Minus 1,813 1948 Abraham, son of Terah, was born. Minus 1,803 1958 Sarah, daughter of Haran, was born. Minus 1,788 1973 Abraham married Sarah. Minus 1,765 1996 dispersion from Babel after building the tower. Minus 1,761 2000 Terah left Ur Kasdim with his family. Minus 1,755 2006 Noah died. Minus 1,743 2018 The covenant, Brit Bain Habitarim, with Abraham. Minus 1,738 2023 Abraham settled in Canaan. Minus 1,727 2034 Ishmael, son of Abraham, was born. Minus 1,713 2048 Abraham circumcised himself and Ishmael. Minus 1,713 2048 Sodom and Gomorrah were destroyed. Minus 1,713 2048 Isaac, son of Abraham, was born. Minus 1,677 2084 The Acta, where Isaac was brought on the altar by Abraham. Minus 1,677 2084 Sarah died. Minus 1,653 2,108 Jacob and Esau were born. Minus 1,638 2,123 Abraham died. Minus 1,603 2,158 Shem, son of Noah, died. Minus 1,590 2,171 Isaac blessed Jacob instead of Esau. Minus 1,576 2,185 Jacob went to Haran. Minus 1,574 2,187 Eber, great-grandson of Shem, died. Minus 1,569 2,192 Jacob married Leah and Rachel. Minus 1,566 2,195 Levi, son of Jacob and Leah, was born. Minus 1,562 2,199 Joseph, son of Jacob and Rachel, was born. Minus 1,556 2,205 Jacob left Haran. Minus 1,553 2,208 Benjamin was born. Minus 1,545 2,216 Joseph was sold. Minus 1,533 2,228 Isaac died. Minus 1,532 2,229 Joseph became viceroy of Egypt. Minus 1,526 2,235 Kahat, son of Levi, was born. Minus 1,523 2,238 Jacob, and his family, went to Egypt. Living in Egypt. Secular year Jewish year event in history. Minus 1506 2255 Jacob died. Minus 1429 2332 after Levi died. The enslavement in Egypt began. Minus 1393 2368 Moses was born. Minus 1355 2406 Joshua was born. Minus 1314 2447 Moses encountered the burning bush. Minus 1313 2448 the Jewish nation left Egypt. Traveling through the desert. Secular year Jewish year event in history. Minus 1310 2448 the Jewish nation crossed the Red Sea. Minus 1313 2448 the revelation at Mount Sinai and the giving of the Torah. Minus 1313 2448 Moses broke the tablets. Minus 1312 2449 Moshe came down Mount Sinai with the second tablets. Minus 1312 2449 the tabernacle was erected. Minus 1312 2449 the spies returned from Canaan with bad news. Minus 1274 2487 Aharon and Miriam died. Minus 1273 2488 Moses died. Judges and early prophets. Secular year Jewish year event in history. Minus 1273 2488 the Jews crossed the Jordan into Canaan. Minus 1258 2503 the appointment of the land of Israel was completed. Minus 1245 2516 Joshua died. Minus 1228 2533 the rule of judges began with Othniel ben Kenaz. Minus 1188 2573 Ehud ben Gera became leader. Minus 1107 2654 Shamgar ben Anath died. Minus 1107 2654 Deborah became leader. Minus 1067 2694 Gideon became leader. Minus 1027 2734 Abimelech, son of Gideon, became leader. Minus 1024 2737 Tola, son of Pua, became leader. Minus 1003 2758 Jahir, the Jalidite, became leader. Minus 982 2779 Jephthah, Hagiladi, became leader. Minus 969 2792 Elon, Hazabuloni, became leader. Minus 959 2802 Abdon ben Hillel became leader. Minus 951 2810 Samson became leader. Minus 931 2830 Eli the Cohen became leader. 907 2854 David was born. Minus 890 2871 Samuel became leader. Kings and the First Holy Temple. Secular year Jewish year event in history. Minus 879 2882 Saul was appointed king. Minus 877 2884 David became king of Judah in Hebron. Minus 869 2892 David became king of Israel in Jerusalem. 137 2924 Solomon became king. Minus 833 2928 the building of the first Beit Hamikdash commenced. Minus 827 2935 the first Beit Hamikdash was completed. Minus 797 2964 Solomon died and his kingdom was divided. Minus 797 2964 Rehoboam, son of Solomon, became king of Judah. Minus 797 2964 Jeroboam ben Nebat became king over Israel. Minus 718 3043 Elijah went up in a chariot of fire. Minus 677 3084 Joash renovated the Beit Hamikdash. Minus 619 3142 Isaiah began his prophecies. Minus 574 3187 the first two of the 10 tribes were exiled. Minus 566 3195 another two of the 10 tribes were exiled. Minus 562 3199 Hezekiah became king of Judah. Minus 556 3205 the last of the 10 tribes were exiled. Minus 548 3213 Sennacherib invaded the land of Judah and retreated. Minus 533 3228 Manasseh, son of Hezekiah, became king of Judah. Minus 463 3298 Jeremiah began his prophecies. Minus 458 3303 Josiah renovated the Beit Hamikdash. Minus 442 3319 Jerusalem was conquered and Jehoiakim, was exiled. Minus 443 321 Jehoiakim burned the Book of Lamentations composed by Jeremiah. Minus 434 3327 Jerusalem was conquered again and Jehoiakim was exiled. Minus 433,331 Jeremiah persisted in prophesying calamity. Minus 429,332 Ezekiel prophesied in exile. Minus 425,336 the final Babylonian siege of Jerusalem. Minus 423,338 the walls of Jerusalem were penetrated. Minus 423,338 the sacrifices ceased in the Beit Hamikdash. Minus 423,338 the first Beit Hamikdash was destroyed. Exile in Babylon. Secular year Jewish year event in history. Minus 423,339 Gedaliah ben Achikam was killed. Minus 421,340 Daniel interpreted Nebuchadnezzar dream. Minus 410,352 Ezekiel prophesied about the future Beit Hamikdash. Minus 372,389 Daniel read the writing on the wall. Minus 372,389 Daniel was thrown into the lion's den. Minus 371,390 Zerubbabel led the return to the land of Israel. Minus 373,391 building of second Beit Hamikdash commenced. Then halted. Minus 395 Akashverosh II made his great banquet. Minus 399 Esther was taken to the palace. Minus 357 Esther took action against Haman's decree. Minus 306 Mordecai proclaimed the celebration of Purim. Minus 308 building of the second Beit Hamikdash resumed. Minus 312 the second Beit Hamikdash was completed. Building of the second Holy Temple. Secular year Jewish year event in history. Minus 313 Ezra led the second return to the land of Israel. Minus 326 Nehemiah returned to rebuild walls of Jerusalem. Minus 348 Ezra died. Minus 348 Simon the Zodic met Alexander the Great. Minus 349 the Minyan Shtaro began. Greek cultural domination. Secular year Jewish year event in history. Minus 273 Simon the Zodic died. Minus 246 72 elders translated the Torah into Greek, Septuagint. Minus 143,621 the revolt of Mattatyahu the Shashmanai. Kingdom of Judea. Dynasty of the Shashmanaim. Secular year Jewish year event in history. Minus 139,622 Judah the Maccabee ruled. Minus 139,622 the second Beit Hamikdash was rededicated. Minus 138,623 Hanukkah was declared a festival. Minus 133,628 Judah the Maccabee was killed in battle. Minus 133,628 Yonatan, son of Mattatyahu, ruled. Minus 127,334 Shimon, son of Mattatyahu, ruled. Minus 119,642 Yohanan Harkanos, son of Shimon, ruled. Minus 93,668 Judah Aristobulus, son of Yochanan Harkanos, ruled. Minus 91,670 Alexander Yanai, son of Yochanan Harkanos, ruled. Minus 73,688 Queen Shalom Zion, Salome Alexandra, wife of Alexander Yanai, ruled. Minus 65,696 Aristobulus II, son of Alexander Yanai, ruled /TD. Minus 61,700 the Romans gained control of Judea. Minus 61,700 Harkanos II, son of Alexander Yanai, ruled. Minus 43,721 Antigonus, son of Aristobulus II, ruled. Roman client kings and rulers, the Herodian dynasty. Secular year Jewish year event in history. Minus 36,725 Herod I ruled. Killing all the Shashmanaim. Minus 33,728 Hillel became the leader of the Torah scholars. Minus 19,342 Herod I began rebuilding the second Beit Hamikdash. Minus 11,350 renovation of the second Beit Hamikdash was completed. 13,761 Archelaus, son of Herod I, ruled. 3,768 Hillel died. 3,770 Archelaus was deposed by the Roman emperor. 3,781 Agrippa I, grandson of Herod I, ruled. 3,788 the Sanhedrin moved from the second Beit Hamikdash. 3,804 Agrippa II, son of Agrippa I, ruled. 53,810 Rabban Gamliel I, son of Shimon, grandson of Hillel, died. 3,826 Vespasian arrived in Judea to reassert Roman authority. 3,829 the second Beit Hamikdash was destroyed. The Talmudic era. The Mishnah. Secular year Jewish year event in history. 74 3,834 are Yohanan ben Zakkai died. 86 3,846 the Sanhedrin moved from place to place, under Ar-Gamliel II. 133 3,893 Bader fell, and the Bar Kokhba revolt ended in tragedy. 134 3,894 Judaism was banned, and Ar-Akiva was imprisoned. 189 3,949 Ar Judah Hanasi completed the Mishnah around this time. The Talmudic era. The Gemara. Secular year Jewish year event in history. 219 3,979 Rab left the land of Israel and settled in Babylonia. 247 4007 Shmuel was the Talmudic authority in Babylonia. 254 4014 Ar Yohanan was the leading Talmudic authority. 294 4050 Ar Huna was the leading Talmudic authority. 298 4008 Ar Yehuda was the leading Talmudic authority. 300,060 Ar Kista was the leading Talmudic authority. 309 4000 was the leading Talmudic authority. 321 4081 Ar Yosef was the leading Talmudic authority. 325 4085 Abedi was the leading Talmudic authority. 338 4098 Rava was the leading Talmudi. 9 4119 Hillel II, who established the calendar, became Nasi. 392 4152 Ar Ashi was the leading Talmudic authority. 427 4187 Ar Ashi died after the compilation of the Gemara. 475 4235 The Talmud was complete when Ravina II died. The Rabbanan. Secular year Jewish year event in history. 551 4311 Mar Zutra proclaimed Jewish self-rule in Babylonia. The Janim. Secular year Jewish year event in history. 589 4349 The Talmudic Academy of Pumbedita was reconstituted. 609 4369 The Talmudic Academy of Sura was reconstituted. 614 4374 The Persians conquered the land of Israel. 14 4374 The Jews were allowed to return to Jerusalem. 629 4389 The Byzantine Empire reconquered the land of Israel. 636 4396 Ar Yitzhak was the last Jayon of Nehardeh, Firashuver. 637 4397 The Arabs conquered the land of Israel. 645 4405 One of the Takanat Hajanim was enacted at this time. 755 4515 Ar Jayon left Iraq for the land of Israel. 759 4519 Ar Yehuda became Jayon of Surah. 759 4519 The Halachat Idalat, B.A. Hag, was written at this time. 788 4500 of the Takanat Hajanim was enacted at this time. 858 4618 Aramrum, who wrote the Siddur, became Jayon of Surah. 928 4688 Rabbi Anusayadiyah was appointed Jayon of Surah. 955 4715 4 captives were ransomed at around this time. 968 4728 Ar Sherera became Jayon of Pumbedita. 997 4757 Ar Hai became, the last, Jayon of Pumbedita. 1038 4798 Ar Hai died. And the academies of Babylon declined. The early Rishonim, the Crusade massacres. Secular year Jewish year event in history. 1044,800 Rabbi Anujersim Mir Hagola died. 1,848 The Rif arrived in Spain from Morocco. 1096 4856 The Crusaders destroyed Jewish communities. 1099 4859 Jerusalem was captured by the Crusaders. 1103 4063 The Rif died. 1105 4800 and Rashi died. Era of the Tosafot began. 1135 4895 The Rambam, Maimonides, was born. 1144 4904 The first, recorded, blood libel took place. 1147 4907 The Crusaders attacked Jewish communities. 1147 4907 Rabbi Anutam was captured by the Crusaders. 1148 4908 The Rambams and the Radak's families left Cordova. 1165 4925 The Rambam visited the land of Israel. 1171 4931 Rabbi Anutam died. 1175 4935 The Rashbam died. 1184 4944 The young son of the Ri was killed. 1187 4948 Jews were allowed to return to Jerusalem. 1189 4949 Ar Yaakov d'Orleans was killed in London. 1190 4950 Jews were massacred in England in the Third Crusade. 1191 4951 Rabbi David Kimchi, known as the Radak, wrote his commentary. 1194 4954 The Ramban, Nachmanides, was born. 1198 4959 The Aryabid died. 1204 4965 The Rambam died. 1236 4996 Rampaging mobs massacre Jews. 1242 5002 A massive burning of the Talmud took place in Paris. 1244 5004 Jerusalem was sacked by Egyptians and Turks. 1252 5012 The Inquisition began to use torture. 1267 5027 The Ramban left Spain and settled in the land of Israel. 1270 5030 The Ramban died. 1286 5046 The Maher Amir Rothenberg was imprisoned. 1295 5050 New works advanced the study of Kabbalah. 1295 5050 The era of the Tosafot concluded at around this time. Later Rishonim. Persecutions and expulsions. Secular year Jewish year event in history. 1295 5050 All Jews were expelled from England. 1293 5053 The Maher Amir Rothenberg died in prison. 1298 5058 The Rheinfleisch massacres began. 1298 5058 The author of the Mordecai and Haggahat Maimoniyot were killed. 1305 5065 The Rashba placed a limited ban on philosophy. 1305 5065 The Rosh and his son, the Tur, arrived in Spain. 1306 5066 All Jews were expelled from France. 1310 5070 The Rashba died. 1325 5080 Jews were massacred by the Pasteros Crusaders. 1327 5088 The Rosh died. 1336 5096 Jews of Germany were massacred by the armed letter bands. 1338 1098 The Ralbag commentary on the Bible. 1349 5109 The Black Death massacres swept across Europe. 1367 5127 Iran. Ribish, and other scholars in Spain were imprisoned. 1391 5151 Jews of Spain were massacred. Many were forced to convert. 1391 5151 The Ribish and Rashbats left Spain. 1394 5155 The final expulsion of Jews from France. 1413 5173 R. Yosef Albo was in a forced debate with Christians. 1421 5181 Jews in Austria were massacred in the Wiener Gezira. 1475 5235 The invention of printing was used for Jewish books. 1481 5241 The Inquisition was established in Spain. 1488 5248 R. Obadiah de Berdenauer settled in Jerusalem. 1491 5251 Columbus consulted R. Abraham Zacuto for his travels. 1492 5252 All Jews were expelled from Spain and Sicily. The great scholars of the Shulchan Aruch and Torah consolidation. Secular year Jewish year event in history. 1493 5253 R. Itzhak Abarbanel arrived in Naples from Spain. 1496 5257 All Jews were expelled from Portugal. 1516 5276 The Ein Yaakov was printed. 1516 5276 The Turks, Ottoman Empire, conquered Eretz Yisrael. 1525 5285 R. Yosef Yasselman saved many Jews during the Peasants' War. 1553 5314 A mass burning of Jewish books took place in Rome. 1563 5323 The Shulchan Aruch was completed by R. Yosef Karo. 1575 5330 The Shulchan Aruch was published with supplements of Rama. 1572 5332 The Arizal died in Tzfat. 5333 The Maharal came to Prague. 1573 5334 The Maharshal died. 1575 5335 R. Yosef Karo died in Safat. 1599 5359 The Maharal returned to Prague again. 1614 5374 The Maharsha became rabbi in Lublin. 1616 5377 The Tosafot Yom Tov commentary was concluded. 1621 5382 The Shallow arrived in the land of Israel. 1629 5389 R. Yom Tov Lippmann Heller was imprisoned in Prague. 1640 5400 R. Yoel Sirks, The Bach. Died. 1646 5406 The Shach and Taz, on Shulchan Aruch, were printed. 1648 5408 Jews were massacred by Shmuel forces. Early Akaranim and East European massacres. Secular year Jewish year event in history. 1654 5414 The first Jews settled in New Amsterdam, New York. 1655 5415 Many Jews killed in Russian and Swedish invasions of Poland. 1656 5416 Jews were permitted to live in England. 1656 5416 Baruch Spinoza was excommunicated. 1673 5433 The Magen Abraham, on Shulchan Aruch, was completed. 1676 5437 Shabtai Tzvi died as a Muslim. 1689 5449 The Beit Shmuel, on the Shulchan Aruch, was printed. 1698 5458 The Baal Shem Tov was born. 1702 5463 The Nia Yahushua's family was killed in an explosion. 1712 5472 The Sittei Chachamim was arrested. 1724 5484 Ardat Yaakov Kulai, Miam Loizi, arrived in Constantinople. 1727 5487 The Mishnah Elimelech died. 1034 5494 Jews were massacred by the Haida, Akaranim and early Hasidim. Secular year Jewish year event in history. 1741 5501 The Or Hashayim arrived in the land of Israel. 1747 5507 Ar Moshe Haim Luzito, Runkle, died in Akko, Acre. 1755 5510 Ar Jonathan Beskuds became rabbi in Hamburg. 1754 5515 Ar Yechezkel Landau, known as the Noda by Yehuda, became rabbi in Prague. 1757 5518 The Frankists instigated mass burnings of the Talmud. 1759 5519 Frankists supported blood libel charges in public debate. 1765 5520 The Baal Shem Tov died. 1764 5524 The Council of Four Lands, known as the Vayat Arba Erzod, was discontinued. 1768 5528 Despite resistance, the Haidamax massacred thousands. 1772 5532 The Maggid of Mazuritz died. 1782 5542 R. N. Edler and Chatham Sofer visited the Noda by Yehuda. 1786 5546 R. Elimelech of Lizins died. 1791 5551 The Pale of Settlement was established in Russia. 1793 5553 Jews suffered in reign of terror of French Revolution. 1797 5558 The Vilna Gaon died. 1798 5559 The Bal Hahanya was released from first imprisonment. 1799 5559 Napoleon led an army expedition through the land of Israel. 1806 5566 The Judah, Arhaim Yosef David Ajalai, died. 1806 5566 The Chatham Sofer became rabbi in Presburg. 1809 5570 R. Levi Yitzhak of Berdichev died. 1810 5571 R. Nachman of Breslov died. 1814 5074 R. Akiva became rabbi in Posen. 1814 5575 Koznitzer Maggid and Yehudi of Peshiska, both died. 1815 5575 Choza of Lublin and R. Mendel of Rimano both died. 1819 5579 Anti-Jewish riots spread throughout Germany. 1827 5587 Russia began conscripting Jewish children to the army. 1845 600 R. Yisrael of Ruzin was released from imprisonment. Later Akaranim and the Changing Society. Secular year Jewish year event in history. 1843 5603 The Tzemach Tzedek of Lubavitch was repeatedly arrested in Russia. 1846 5606 Sir Moshe Montefiore visited Russia to help local Jews. 1848 5609 R. Yisrael Salander left Vilna. 1851 5611 R. Shimshon Raphael Hirsch became rabbi in Frankfurt am Main. 1859 5619 R. Menachem Mendel of Kotsk died. 1864 5624 The Malvin was imprisoned and then expelled from Romania. 1866 5626 Judashe Haram, Tiferet Shlomo, and Tzemach Tzedek died. 1873 5633 The Chafetz Chaim was published. 1874 5634 The Minchat Chinook died. 1878 5638 Petah Tikva agricultural settlement was established. 1881 5641 Many Jews began leaving Russia after a wave of pogroms. 1886 5646 Ar Shlomo Gans Fried, author of Kietzer Shulchan Aruch, died. 1892 5652 Arheim, Brisker, became rabbi in Brisk. 1905 5665 The Sfat Emet died. 1905 5665 Many Jews were killed in official Russian pogroms. 1911 5671 Chazanish was published. 1914 5674 Over 500,000 Jewish soldiers fought in World War I. 1918 5678 Over 60,000 Jews were killed during the Russian Revolution. 1923 5684 The Daf HaYomi study cycle commenced. 1927 5687 The 6th Lubavitcher Rebbe was released from Soviet prison. 1938 5699 Jews were attacked in the Kristallnacht pogroms in Germany. The Holocaust. Secular year Jewish year event in history. 1939 5699 Germany started World War II. And mass killing of Jews. 1941 5701 Nazi Germany unexpectedly invaded Russia. 1941 5701 200,000 Jews were killed at Babi Yar and Ponary. 1942 5702 400,000 Jews of Warsaw were sent to death camps. 1943 5703 Nazi Germany experienced massive losses in the Battle of Stalingrad. 1943 5703 The remaining Jews in Warsaw staged a massive uprising. 1943 5703 Jewish uprisings at Treblinka, Sobibor, and Bialystok. 1943 5703 The Danish people quietly rescued 93% of their Jews to safety. 1944 5704 300,000 Hungarian Jews were killed in 3 months. 1944 5705 Uprising in Auschwitz death camp just before freedom. 1945 5705 Nazi Germany was conquered. And World War II ended. 1945 5705 6 million Jews were killed by the Nazis during the war. The modern state of Israel. Secular year Jewish year event in history. 1947 5707 Publication of the Talmud Encyclopedia was commenced. 1947 5708 The United Nations divided Israel. 1947 5708 Arabs attacked Israel to gain territory. 1948 5708 The State of Israel was established. 1948 5708 Israel was invaded by many Arab countries. 1949 5709 The War of Independence in Israel ended. 1955 5710 All Jews left the ancient Jewish community of Iraq. 1955 5710 Almost all Jews of Yemen emigrated to Israel. 1951 5711 The Lubavitcher Rebbe accepts the mantle of leadership. 1956 5717 Jewish forces invaded Egypt and conquered the Sinai Desert. 1967 5727 The Lubavitcher Rebbe established the Tefillin campaign. 1967 5727 Jerusalem reunited under Jewish rule in the Six-Day War. 1973 5734 2,500 Jewish soldiers were killed in the Yom Kippur War. 1974 5734 The Lubavitcher Rebbe established the Shabbat Candle campaign. 1982 5742 Massive enemy arsenals were discovered in Lebanon. 1987 5746 The first international conference of Chabad Lubavitch emissaries. 1993 5753 A secret agreement signed in Oslo. 1994 5754 The Lubavitcher Rebbe passed away. 2008 5767 Deadly terrorist attack at the Chabad house in Mumbai, India, kill 6. 2020 5780 Israel signed Abraham Accords, normalizing relations with UAE and Bahrain, soon followed by Sudan and Morocco.
Be very careful when you hurt someone by telling them something they done wrong. Because in your effort to point out to someone else what they have done wrong, just understand that the divine language shifts back to you. When you you being the person pointing up the wrong human to the other. So, okay, well, so I'm going to tell you this, you may, you're going to position for this area, or you've really done something wrong. Whether my intention, again, is hurtful, whether my intention is really helpful, or whether my intention is childish. In some extent, the moment you go in and point out the wrongdoing with someone else, is the moment that your mind will shift back to the Nokia, to the rebuker, and HaKadosh Baruch Hu says, okay, if you're on such a level to go ahead and cause someone else pain, whether again, purposeful, helpful, unintentional, let's have a look at your life. Let's have a look at your life. He says, because at the end of the day, I go with your Ruben. I say, Ruben, you know what, Ruben, I'm really disappointed to see how much Russian parties. Really, it's terrible. I don't even go out to anybody and everyone will listen. It's terribly disappointing. Now, okay, so there's a little bit of this but if the response to this fantastic, Ruben's going to be a bit sad. Ruben is going to be a little bit subdued, a little bit crushed, because no one likes to be told that there is something wrong. So whether my intention is purposeful, whether my intention is purposeful, or whether it's harder, at the end I can follow up with this, okay, now I want to seem to Ruben do my review. Let's have a look. Let's have a look at you. Let's see again, you're giving what's not much harder. Let's see ultimately again how it is that you are doing in that particular area. He goes on and says, Harikam, sorry, Dad, next shot, so you can actually keep the brackets on, the brackets down. Speaking of our Ikama Usavira, Shashini Dana, however, who looks at is, have I ever transgressed Savira, or which I am giving to someone
I'm Dr. Justin Sledge, and welcome to Esoterica, where we explore the arcane in history, philosophy, and religion. One of the most difficult aspects in starting to study Jewish mysticism and Kabbalah is getting a handle on just how those ideas developed over time. It's tempting to think that, for instance, Kabbalah has just always existed in the form that we have it, or that Kabbalah is just one thing at all. Of course, neither of these positions is really tenable. Such notions developed greatly through the ages and are still developing. And there are now, and there have always been, numerous mutually exclusive schools of Jewish mysticism and Kabbalah. This class is meant to serve as an introduction to Jewish mysticism and Kabbalah from the point of view of its incredibly complex development from the prophets of ancient Israel unto the rise of modern Hasidism in the 18th century. Of course, this series isn't meant to be exhaustive by any means, but only should serve as a springboard for deeper study and reflection, and hopefully it will also enable you to situate developments in Jewish mysticism and Kabbalah in their historical and cultural context, and hopefully embolden you to dive into the primary texts, which are admittedly as sublime as they are obscure. Let me express my gratitude to Congregation Tchia for allowing me to use these lectures to reach a larger audience here on Esoterica. If you want, you can find the entire series under the playlist Entering the Garden, an Introduction to Jewish Mysticism and Kabbalah. I'll be uploading them over the next few weeks, or if you find these episodes after autumn of 2021 and you want to watch the entire series, you can find them in that playlist. If you find this series on Kabbalah interesting, I'd hope you check out my other content on topics in esotericism, and perhaps consider supporting the production of free academic and scholarly topics in occultism, hermetic philosophy, by joining my Patreon, or perhaps with a one-time donation. You can find those links below, and I really appreciate your consideration. Now, let's enter the garden of Jewish mysticism and Kabbalah. Well, I want to say welcome back. Welcome back this evening to the second part of our 10-session walk through Jewish mysticism and Kabbalah. And as we talked about last time, right, and Kabbalah, right, we're still 1,200 years away from Kabbalah. It's still way off in the distance. So we're still very much in the time period right around the turn of the Common Era. That is to say, around the year 0, right? That's if you want to get an anchor of where we are. And just to recap a bit, right? Just to recap a little bit from last time to sort of see where we are in the lay of the land. We defined mysticism, at least for the purposes of this class, which doing things like defining mysticism makes it certain that everybody will disagree with you that studies this stuff. So I just basically, anytime I say, I'm going to define mysticism, it's like putting a target on my back. But the way that I want to define it is as a non-rational mode in which one experiences or learns about fundamental reality, and also the traditions that accrue around those experiences. So I would call someone, for instance, that studies mysticism for the idea that those mystics learn fundamental truths, even though perhaps that person themselves didn't have those experiences. I would also consider that person a mystic. So I would say that there is also the idea that you lean on the mystics to learn what they learn, and that puts you in the tradition of folks who are, in fact, mystics. And there's an entire tradition in Judaism of what we'll call intellectual mystics. Those much later. And intellectual mystics are those that say, look, I never had this experience, but I trust that this person did, and I think that they're fundamentally right. So that's also, I think, another form of mysticism that actually doesn't involve mystical experiences. And as I mentioned last time, the first Jewish mystics weren't even Jewish. The first Jewish mystics were Israelites, which is a much broader category. Remember that the Jews received that name, the Yehudim received that name as being descendants of one of the tribes that comprise the 12 tribes of Israel. And so Jewish mystics actually make up a minority of this. So many of the prophets we have in the Hebrew Bible are from all over. They're not necessarily Judahites. And we said that the two forms of mysticism that seem to have been prevalent in Israelite society at that time were folks who experienced theophany, that is to say, God showed up to them, God appeared to them, and on the other hand, for other people, God spoke to them. And if you speak on the behalf of God, that makes you a navi, a prophet. Although sometimes those folks are referred to as ro'eh, as seers. The idea that either those folks can see the future or they hear something from God, and they communicate that to other people. And those folks we typically refer to as the prophets. And the most important theophanies in the Hebrew Bible, historically speaking at least, we don't think that the theophany described in Exodus, where God showed up to the Israelites, and to Moses. We're fairly confident that that's a mythological piece of information, not a historical one. But we are relatively confident, many scholars are relatively confident, that the prophets Isaiah and Ezekiel did have some kind of phenomenological encounter. In that encounter, they recorded in the literature of the book of Isaiah and the book of Ezekiel, respectively. Now, the idea that, now you might be wondering, right, how can you say that Moses didn't exist? Well, it's not about whether he did or didn't, it's about what we have evidence for. And we just don't have evidence, really, to believe that happened. But we have pretty good evidence to believe that the experiences of Isaiah and Ezekiel were in fact recorded. And as we talked about last time, prophecy is very well attested all over the ancient Near East, with the weird exception of Egypt. Egypt is kind of, which all things being equal, sounds great. I wouldn't want to live anywhere. I don't want any prophets in my neighborhood. I don't want any guy walking down my street screaming at people because they're like, woe to the disbelievers, Yahweh's going to kill you all. I'm like, I'm going to call the cops on you again. So I don't want to live anywhere near prophets. And so Egypt seems like a pretty great place to be prophet-free. But at any rate, we saw last time that there are a great deal of prophets that live all through the ancient Near East, and especially in the Neo-Assyrian context, which tracks very carefully, very temporally to the ancient Israelite context. And so we actually know a good deal about those other ancient Near East prophets. We also know that one of the things that happened in the ancient Near Eastern world were prophetic duels. They just didn't take prophets' words for granted because they kind of seemed crazy. And if they seemed crazy to you, they seemed kind of crazy to people back then too, right? Just because you see Jesus in your toast doesn't mean Jesus is in your toast. It might be that you might need help. And so many people in the ancient world also thought, right, this guy's just drunk, right? And there's many cases in the Bible where people do prophecy and other people are like, yeah, they're drunk. And so this was an idea. And so we see other ancient Near East cultures engaging in prophecy and other mechanisms by which to detect whether a prophecy is reliable or dual between prophets to as prophets are actually telling the truth. Prophetic duels needs to be a video game. Just saying. It's a fighting game with prophets. And what brings prophecy to an end and what sets us up for our transition to tonight is that, as you may remember, part of what happens in the theophany literature of the Hebrew Bible is that the God of the Israelites, Yahweh, makes themselves known by revealing a bunch of very inconvenient rules. And by revealing all these very inconvenient rules, the idea is that the Israelites are bound to follow those rules, and Yahweh will protect them and give them the land and provide for them to have large families and agricultural surplus. Well, what ends up happening is that for various reasons, the Israelite state is destroyed and the Judean state is destroyed. And as you might imagine, when your entire theology is founded on a vassal contract, right, and your vassal, the person who justifies your vassal relationship, gets defeated, well, that's the end of that. And so, again, it's like you're living in a house and your landlord gets bought out by, I don't know, some sketchy investment firm. Well, you got a new landlord. You have no longer a relationship with old landlords. Well, now you've got to deal with other gods. And so the Israelites have some pretty complicated problems in their hands. And the pretty complicated problem on their hand is we've predicated an entire theology on one system, and it didn't work. Our God seems like either God is defeated or we're defeated, and what now? Right? What do you do now with an awkward relationship with your former landlord? And so what's going to happen is that prophecy, the idea that there are people speaking on behalf of Yahweh, what's going to happen is that's going to increasingly go away, right? And a new form of prophecy is going to emerge. And that new form of religion is going to be a new kind of mysticism. And that new kind of mysticism is what scholars typically refer to as the apocalyptic. All right. Tanakh pop quiz. I bet you know this was coming. So Tanakh pop quiz, and this is a trick question because, of course, it is in a class about mysticism. Does anyone here know, and feel free to put it in the chat, where in the Tanakh are the events surrounding the Hanukkah story recorded? So I think I should say they're not. That's the answer that's the less wrong answer. You're certainly right, they're not recorded straightforward. Anyone know where the events of the Hanukkah story are actually depicted in the Tanakh, not in the Apocrypha, like in the book of Maccabees, where they're literally described, but in Tanakh, in the Hebrew Bible, in the Old Testament. Everyone's like, why you ask me damn questions like this? I'm the one taking this class, right? So actually, you are right. It is not described transparently in Tanakh. It is, however, described encodedly in the book of Daniel. It is actually encoded in the book of Daniel. Now, the book of Daniel was probably the least read Jewish book in the Hebrew Bible. It's in some ways one of the most confusing. But historical scholars of the Hebrew Bible, scholars of the book of Daniel, are fairly confident that encoded in a very elaborate system of symbols, the story of the conquest of Syria, Judea by Alexander the Great, the civil wars between his generals that led to the various empires like the Ptolemies and the Seleucids, also with the rise of the Romans and the period of the Maccabean Rebellion, are in fact described using coded language in the book of Daniel in chapters 7 through 12. If you've never read the book of Daniel, it's a very weird book, and by the way, it's one of the few books in the Hebrew Bible that actually has extensive sections actually written in Aramaic. In chapters 7 through 12, there is a section that is encoded using a very elaborate system of symbols that describe all the things I just put out. Now, what's very interesting about this section of the book of Daniel is that the writer, whoever's writing it, is describing the very beginning of the Maccabean rebellion, right? But they never describe the end of it. Now, that leaves an open question. Why don't they describe the eventual success of the Maccabeans? And they're very pro-Maccabean, at least they're kind of tempered on the Maccabeans, actually, which a lot of people were because they were terrifying to anyone that wasn't a religious zealot. Everybody in this class will be killed by the Maccabees, just FYI. Everybody. They would gladly kill all of us for being like, not them. Which is always weird about Hanukkah. Hanukkah's a complicated idea if you're a progressive, liberal-minded Jewish person. Because they're like, yeah, I'm celebrating the very people that would have literally killed the Taliban, the Taliban of Judaism. At any rate, we don't know why they don't finish. We don't know. They may have just died. You know, it was a war, and the Maccabees didn't like people who could, I don't know, read. And so they may have just got killed. It may have just gotten killed. And so we don't see the end of it. But what's interesting about it is we now have a really good idea about when the book was written, at least those sections. They were written sometimes after the Maccabean revolt began, but before it ended. So we know it began around 160 and it concluded around 167 BCE. So we have a good idea about where that section of Daniel, when it was written. Now, why would people encode things in strange language? Why would people encode things in weird symbols? Well, because it's a new kind of literature emerging, a new kind of religiosity emerging in the aftermath of the demise of the prophetic period. And that new kind of religiosity is what we call apocalypticism. Also, by the way, describing current events as if they're taking place far in the future is what we call in the literature ex eventu prophecy. The vast majority of historical prophets did not predict the future. We'll talk more about the ones that tried and failed in a minute. Prophets who drive all kinds of weird things. And I'm sure folks have read some sections from the book of Daniel or the book of Revelation, written by St. John, or Nostradamus. So many folks have read Nostradamus. It's always weird stuff like an eagle. An eagle comes from the east and attacks the great bear, and the bear follows the sun, and the sun turns to blood, and you're like, what in the hell are you talking about? They're not describing the language, right? This is what we call ex eventu prophecy. They're describing things that have happened using codes. Why would they do that? Well, because it might be politically expedient to be a little cryptic, right? Because again, what is one of the things these people like to do? Criticize the standard order of things. So they want to be the person living in the Roman Empire, being like, the Romans suck and I hate them, and God's going to kill them all soon. You want to publish that? You don't want to publish that because they'll crucify you for it. So what do you write? Well, the Kittim, right, will arise from the sea and then blah, 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 right? You encode it. And the encoding mechanism is part of the apocalyptic literature. So what isn't apocalyptic? That's the first thing we need to do. I know, right, that when most people hear the word apocalypticism, they're thinking end of the world. They're thinking all the crazy stuff happens at the end of the world. The Messiah's going to come, and there's going to be this and that, the Battle of Gog and Magog, and there's going to be all this stuff that happens at the end of whatever. And so many people typically imagine that what apocalypticism is about the future, because the word apocalypticism has been filtered so heavily through Christianity, and Christianity does tend to think of the apocalypse as like something happening in the future, although early Christians thought it was going to happen pretty soon in their lifetime. Jesus kind of drew, but they really thought it was going to happen soon. And this idea that it's going to happen in the future is an idea really from Christianity that has sort of shadowed and flavored the way that we use this word. Most apocalyptic writers, most prophets for that matter, in the Hebrew Bible and the Jewish tradition, don't do much in the way of trying to predict the future. They just don't. Famous case where anyone tried the future in the Hebrew Bible is in the book of Ezekiel, chapter 26, where Ezekiel made what at the time was the single most predictable prediction that one can predict. That is, Nebuchadnezzar would destroy Tyre. Well, he predicted that because Nebuchadnezzar was destroying everything. Everything, right? It's just predicting, right? Like it's like American imperialism will get continue. Yep. It's going on, right? It's a completely normal thing to predict. And then they attacked Tyre, and it didn't work. Nebuchadnezzar was repulsed. And so Ezekiel himself actually has to come back later. He actually back in the same book and says, well, he has to interpret his own prophecy to explain the fact that he was wrong, even though it was a completely, actually predictable thing. So making predictions, especially clear predictions, is a bad idea, right? Folks may know the very famous quote from Friedrich Nietzsche, right? It never hurts a prophet to be too vague, right? If you predict on Tuesday, March 22nd, 2029, that blah, 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 well, your prophetic career rests on that. And so most of the prophecies, they don't predict the future by and large, right? And in general, by the way, that whole Nebuchadnezzar thing for people who are biblical literates is a real pain in their tootsies, because they have to go back and explain why the Bible, why a prophet wrong, and why a prophet admits he got it wrong, and then how we put a spin on it to fix it, and then they further spin it to further fix it. And my favorite example is, yeah, it eventually got conquered by Alexander the Great 400 years later. Somebody conquered it, so Ezekiel wasn't totally wrong. I'm like, really? That's the best you got? Okay. Most Jewish apocalyptic texts just don't have much interest in the end of the world. In fact, when they do describe the end of the world, they almost always lean on Hellenistic ideas. And those Hellenistic ideas, specifically the Stoic idea, once it basically got everything at the end, that there was going to be some kind of global conflagration, that the world would be ended, would be destroyed by a giant fire. That's a very common idea in the ancient world. And so, in many ways, the predictions they do give about the end of the world are themselves just the popular ones. If you were to go to a Greek philosopher at the time and ask, the end of the world, they say, the Logos, the fire, is going to consume the whole world. They're like, sounds reasonable. They went with that. So it's actually basically, it's not even really in some sense a Jewish idea as it is a Hellenistic idea. It's a Greek idea. So let's put some context on this, right? I'm going to say what the apocalyptic is in just a minute, but I want to put some context. What you understand about the rise of the apocalyptic is a time period in which it emerged, the political and theological upheavals that lasted from roughly about 586 BCE, when Judea was destroyed, the last independent Jewish state was destroyed, all the way up to around 135 of the Common Era, where the last attempt at an independence movement on the Judea, Jews against the Romans, led by Bar Kokhba, was defeated, with hundreds of thousands of Jewish people being killed in the process. What's important to understand about this political and theological landscape is that there is a major breakdown, as I mentioned earlier, in theology of the. As I mentioned earlier, right, this entire theology is built on what is called the Deuteronomic theology, which is, again, the idea that Yahweh and Israel have a covenant, and that covenant works in the way that the Israelites perform religious duties, and Yahweh gives them stuff, right? That is the way it's supposed to work. The prophets, the way that they understood themselves was as sort of a voice for God, telling the Israelites, you're doing wrong, you're breaking the contract, and if you persist in this, God's going to punish you. God's going to break the contract. Well, after everything comes completely apart, beginning in the 8th century BCE, but by the 6th CE, the entire Judaism is completely destroyed. There's just a serious problem. The serious problem is, if the prophets were right, and if every single Judahite was massacred, well, that would have brought the prophecy to conclusion, right? You broke the treaty, and everyone's dead. Done, right? And that would have been a very neat. When I say neat, I mean not untidy, except for all the gore of everybody massacred. But it would have been a very tidy story theologically. Well, what happened? The Babylonians didn't kill everybody. They took the entire Judean aristocratic section into exile in Judea. Keeping on. Not in the land, right? Not in their own land, but in Babylon. And not only that, they had a good time. We have extensive records of the Jewish population living in ancient Babylon. And we know they were living relatively well. They owned slaves. They had land. They had businesses, right? In fact, their life was a battle that when the Jewish people were allowed to return to Israel, to Judea, by the Persians, many didn't want to go. They're like, why do I want to return to like a rock that has no inhabitable land? That's here. But these rivers, we can like live in good. This is empire. They didn't go home, and so home, right? Because they weren't born there. They were diaspora Jews living in Babylon in comfort and security. Why go back to a wasteland to rebuild something, right? That isn't that great after all. It's like a rock in the middle. And this was a big problem. In fact, the Jewish people actually pressuring them to go back. So again, when we talk about the Babylonian exile and weeping by the rivers of the Euphrates or whatever, a lot of those Jews were not weeping by those rivers. They were very happy to be in exile in Babylon. And we know that because we have records of them living there. The problem, again, is a theological problem. They're still there. They still believe in Yahweh. What do you do when the prophecy meant that you were supposed to be destroyed and you weren't destroyed? So, does God make a new deal with us? Should we still believe in Yahweh? Like, the temple's been destroyed. What's going on with, what do we do with this Yahweh thing? The covenant doesn't make sense anymore. The covenantal theology doesn't make sense because there's a remainder that contradicts it. So, what do you do? What do you do? Well, there's a couple different options. You could try to maintain the old covenantal theology, and some people did try to do that. Some people did try to do that. But you can see the logical problem trying to maintain it. The covenants, the Judahite state's been destroyed, and its aristocracy moved to Babylon. They're still alive. What to do with that? That's a real problem. Well, what arises as a way of settling that problem, right? Settling that problem is by shifting knowledge. Never let a good catastrophe go waste. You simply innovate your theology. And what ends up emerging is a new kind of Judahite theology. In fact, I might even argue that Israelite religion went into exile, but Judaism came back. The religion that the ancient Israelites practiced would be unrecognizable to anyone here. Like killing animals and burning beer and grain to appease a sky god. No one here recognizes a religion like that. But what comes out of exile is a theologically innovated, renovated religion that is much more like the Judaism that we might recognize now. So what happens is that they innovate. They theologically innovate. They develop a new theology that maintains the trappings of the old covenantal theology, but radically philosophically changes what it all means. And so, what are those kinds of changes? The first big change is that Yahweh can't just be the God of Israel anymore. To make this work, Yahweh has to be a God of everything. Not just God of Israel and what the other gods being existing out there in the world, like this is what we call henotheism, right? Your God exists, my God exists, but my God can beat up your God. That's what the Israelites basically believe. Now, the new shift is, not only can my God beat up your God's not real. There's just one God. Monotheism is
most of us are always tzaddik and always rasha. Okay? I am tzaddik in the areas of which I am sinning and which I desire to sin. And quote unquote rasha, although we're going to mitigate that a little bit. I'm rasha in those areas which I transgress or desire to transgress. That's level one. We'll say it's incredibly redemptive state. Because with that means no matter how badly I did something like in any given moment, it will kind of why do you think that because an accident reflective of some eternal state. What that says. Stop over here for today. We'll pick up the definition of that last piece. Alright, so let's say good morning. Let us begin. Good morning, last piece of this course. But the idea that the gates of others that you recognize incredibly dramatic. The governor of saying, even when you go to Gehenna, scared to go with I think it's going to go to Gehenna. How can I say this? But certainly you're going to go to Gehenna. After all, again, David, one thing wrong. Governor Mela ultimately again is Christianity is example of the power of Yeshua. Furthermore, but maybe you're considering showing ego not faith. Maybe you'll do something terrible in the future. I'll give that Carlos something. If it's not good that he speaks, it's not good that he thinks. It's not good that you're going to life. Which is nothing said, Gehenna, which devil out of the first is the Gehenna of all of us, the Gehenna that one experiences. And the result of the snapback, and the result of the turmoil of stress, the being embarrassed. Governor Malik says, God gave us the gates of others. I had experience in my Gehenna when I was thinking of this. The Gemara says, Governor Malik walking through this message, and he always has to be comfortable. The Governor Malik suffers from they say to David, what is the punishment for adultery? What comes for adultery? So David Amalek would say, the punishment is some, but if it doesn't be as well as Abba, but the diet has had to
emerges in the aftermath of this catastrophe. So the God of the Israelites is now said to be the only God, and that God is responsible for everything. And not just responsible for everything, but responsible for everything forever. God has a plan for the entire cosmos. Right? This is going to be decisively important. God is planning everything. And everything that happens is according to that plan, no matter how bad it is, no matter how confusing it is. In fact, the worse it is evidence of the fact that God is preparing something amazing. Right? So this kind of theology is going to be decisively important in this matter. So what also has to happen here, right, is that the Israelites, right, are going to have to begin to change the way they think about their relationship to this God. And the problem is, this God's going to have to tell them what in the world all this means. We're supposed to have this covenant, and it's supposed to be like this, and this is supposed to happen if we keep it, and this is supposed to happen if we don't. Well, we didn't, and we're still here. what's happening? Well, what ends up happening, what ends up emerging, is that new kinds of prophets emerge in which God shows them the plan. Right? Now again, hear the language here, right? The older prophets heard God and communicated what God said. The new kind of prophecy sees what God's showing them, right? It communicates what God shows them in literature. So this is a much more literary movement, and it's a much more visual movement. And it's so distinct that we now think of it as a distinct kind of religiosity. It's not prophecy. They're not speaking on behalf of God. They're describing what God has shown them, what God has revealed to them. And that is a completely different phenomenological mode of experiencing mysticism. Right? A very different kind of mysticism indeed. Now, what precipitates this? How do they get the ability to, what underwrites this? And the answer is really complicated, and the short answer is we don't know. We don't know. Because we don't have good records about, how this goes down. The best theory I've seen is that what ends up happening is that the Judahites go into exile and they come in contact with an up-and-coming important religion called Zoroastrianism. Now you have to understand that when the Judahite aristocracy goes into exile, the Judahite aristocracy is still a relatively...
Rabbi, are you there?
I am, but I'm busy right now.
The ancient Babylonians are like the New Yorkers of the ancient world. They're cosmopolitan, they're literate, they have an ancient culture that's been there for 1,000 years. They are wealthy, they have multiple giant temples, each of which is larger than the Israelite temple. It was a metropolis on an order of magnitude that the ancient Judahites could not have imagined. Ancient Jerusalem was a backwater. It was a tiny settlement of 2,000 people, right, with that little temple there that was, not much bigger than a basketball arena, right? You're talking about an aristocracy that is a relatively backwater people coming into contact with an incredibly old, incredibly literate, right? When the Judahites wanted to write diplomatic documents, they wrote it in the language of the Babylonians, the Akkadians. When they arrived in Babylon, they must have been bowled over by the bumpkinhood of their existence compared to the Babylonians. Again, this is like the Mississippi aristocracy being conquered and then dragged off to New York, right? You can't imagine the shell shock of what must have happened. Furthermore, they're coming in contact with a very dynamic new religion called Zoroastrianism. Zoroastrianism is, of course, a reform religion founded by the prophet Zoroaster, who we don't know much about. Even when he lived is not clear. But if I summarize Zoroastrianism to you, I bet it will sound immediately obvious what they believed. So, Zoroastrianism is a basically dualistic religion that claims that a good god and an evil god are locked into a kind of battle for the destiny of the world. The forces of good are represented by non-physical spiritual entities, and those non-physical spiritual entities are in combat with other non-physical spiritual entities that serve the bad guys. Angels and demons, right? That structure's there. Now, this good versus evil dualism is going to result in a titanic, catastrophic battle at the end of time. The forces of good will win. They will throw the forces of evil into a neither world, right? And not only that, there are even Zoroastrian prophets who are given tours of the underworld. Those tours of the underworld filtered their way up to Europe, and we're fairly confident that Dante Alighieri was influenced by them. The Divine Comedy is probably being influenced by these tours of hell of the Zoroastrian literature. Now, near the end of the world, there's going to be a savior figure, Saoshan, who will lead the forces of good against the forces of evil, and at the end of time, everyone will be resurrected bodily, they will be judged, right? And there is a massive set of literature, right, being composed by Zoroaster, and the idea is that your relationship to scripture is more important in many ways than doing sacrifice, like sacrificing animals. Those are the guys, you may recognize them from the Bible, right? Those are the guys that show up to adore the baby Jesus. At any rate, that should all sound pretty familiar to most of us. If you take a little Judaism and add a little Zoroastrianism to it, shake it up in your cocktail shaker, pour it in a glass, you have all the ingredients for a great cocktail called Christianity. or Islam, apocalyptic Judaism. Now again, many people detest the idea that Judaism could be influenced, informed, changed by non-Jewish pagan people. I got news for you. When the Jewish people arrived in this area, they would have viewed the Zoroastrians as a completely intellectually superior group of people. And I can guarantee you they would have been influenced by them. They would have been influenced by them. So Zoroastrianism probably has a huge impact. And in fact, many ways, Zoroastrianism has a huge impact in world religions in general. They also have a huge impact in music. You may know Freddie Mercury, the lead singer of Queen. He was a Zoroastrian. So thank God for Zoroastrians. They produced the least Freddie Mercury among all things. So sadly, it's a threatened religion now. It's a very tiny religion, primarily located in Iran, America, and in Iraq, or in India rather. But they're not doing that great, unfortunately. They're pretty small. So, we've now talked a little bit about the groundwork for apocalypse, right? We call it a religious mode, but I use the word mode there, some background in philosophy, right? A mode of being. It's a way of doing religion. It's not a religion itself, but it's an articulation within a religion. It existed primarily in Judaism, but obviously persisted in Christianity. But Christianity is just, in many ways, apocalyptic Judaism. It's when, in fact, apocalypticism becomes the religion, right? It's when the shift completely goes over to one side, and the apocalyptic is what really matters, and Judaism becomes an adjunct riding on the tails of the apocalypticism. One can imagine Christianity that way, but also in Islam, also largely an apocalyptic religion. Again, it's a religion based on a guy being shown things by an angel. It's fundamentally an apocalyptic religion. So what makes the apocalyptic? Now, what's important to know about this is that no one sat down in Judea or in Babylon and said, I'm going to invent apocalypticism. What they did was be religious, and they innovated. And the specific religious innovations that they developed, we now call apocalypticism, right? So it's very important to note here, this is a scholarly term applied to an ancient people. And it's always important to know that when you do that, when you apply a schema to ancient people, it never fits perfectly. Left out, something got left in, but it's such a stable kind of scheme that we do think that this is an important and decisive break with the prophetic religion of ancient Israel. So what makes apocalypticism? The first thing is what I mentioned here at the last, but I'll mention it first, because the last will be first. Is the name apocalypticism, right? It comes from the word apokalypsis in Greek, which means to reveal or to uncover. And what's important about this literature is that what tends to group it all together is the idea that God is revealing something fundamental to the person, to the apocalyptic prophet. God's not speaking to the apocalyptic prophet, telling them, go condemn, some king, somebody's like king, right? Go condemn those people for being bad and being rich. That's the way a prophet like Amos worked. God spoke, and Amos went and said, right, woe to you people, cows of Bashan. No, here God revealing various kinds of things to a human age. Typically, that's being mediated by a divine, semi-divine being, typically an angel. So an angel shows up and says, let me show you something. And what do they show them? All kinds of things. What kinds of things? Typically things like cosmology. Apocalyptic Judaism is very interested in how the universe. If you've ever read the Hebrew Bible, one of the things that is weirdly missing from the Hebrew Bible is any discussion of how the world is arranged, right? There's some vague discussions in the book of Genesis, but there's no real sense of like, what is the world exactly? Because they're not really interested in what is the world exactly, right? They're interested in what's going on in Judea with this king. So very important in the apocalyptic mode of Judaism. Also, they're very interested in the past. This is sometimes ironic, considering that most people think of apocalypticism as primarily dealing with the future, but mostly the apocalypticists are interested in the past. So they're very interested in how did we get here? And the thing that they're very interested in is where did evil come from, right? Because if evil is in the world and it's out there, what kind of existence does it have? And they're very interested in where it came from. You'll never see much in the Hebrew Bible about discussing the origins of evil, right? Even the whole talking snake in the Garden of Eden, the writer of that story says, and that's where all evil comes from. It names some things, right? You have to work for your bread, and women's child pain, and the pain in having a child will increase. By the way, it says that the pain will increase. It never says it wasn't. It just went worse. Right? So that's why everything went off the rails. The apocalypse will be very interested in this. Also, they're very interested in the use of symbolism. Right? The Bible doesn't do much in the way of symbolism often. Right? But the apocalypticists will be very interested in symbolism. They're in fact virtually encoding their writings. And also, again, as I mentioned earlier with the exit into prophecy, they're going to be really interested in engaging of social criticism, doing it in a way that in a literary form in which they encode those criticisms by describing them as if they're happening in the future. Right? So they describe present events as if they're living in the future. That's going to be a tip-off for an apocalyptic writer. Amos didn't encode anything. He called people cows for being rich. He's like, you people are bad because you're rich and God hates you. Like, he's not encoding anything. Like, he's not like, and the cows will eat and become fat of the land. No, he's like, I hate you people and God hates you too. Right? That's not what these apocalyptic folks do. But what they're really interested in is oppression, right? They're very interested in oppression and tribulation. Specifically, why do bad things keep happening to us? If our God is the only God, and we have a special relationship with this God, why did the Greeks just like whip our ass? Like, that's a bad thing? Like, we just got whipped by the Romans. They just killed. Like, what's going on, God? Right? That's a real important question to ask, right? I mean, we all ask the sort of like, why bad things happen to good people question. It's like, why did we all get wiped out? They're very interested in why this tribulation is happening, right? And not only that, the apocalypticists claim to know the plan, right? They claim to know the plan. They're also at some level interested in the end of the world. Right? Now, and I say end of the world, what they're really interested in is the righteous and the wicked being separated, and the righteous being rewarded, and the wicked being damned. There's no hint of that in Israelite religion. Everybody in Israelite religion went to the same underworld, Sheol. It doesn't matter if you're a good person or a bad person. You went to the same place and sucked. Well, the apocalyptists say that's not fair. Bad people will get punished. This idea comes directly probably from Zoroastrianism, right? And the good people will get rewarded. That's the extent, really, of how things are going to go down in the future. And of course, right? Why does that make sense? Well, it makes sense because a lot of good people, or at least people who they thought they were good, were suffering enormously under foreign occupation. They're also interested in otherworldly journeys, right? They'll go on journeys of the various realms of heaven, or they'll go on journeys to the various parts of the afterlife. It's very dualistic. That is to say, the world in apocalyptic literature is very starkly divided between the good guys and the bad guys, right? And the good guys are going to win, and the bad guys are going to lose. You don't see that in Israelite religion. In Israelite religion, the prophets are, you're doing bad, but if you do good, God will not punish you. In apocalypticism is, you are bad, and God is going to destroy you. It's a much more dualistic world. Which again, if you study history, in times of intense political crisis, right, dualism emerges. The good guys and the bad guys, right? Whether it's the bourgeoisie and the proletariat, right? Or whether it's the sons of light versus the sons of darkness, polarize the world, and that's and again, I think Marx is kind of apocalyptic in many ways. He would hate that idea, but he can happily roll in his grave. Thinking back to that anti-Semitism on the Jewish question. So anyway, right? Also, what's really important about apocalypticism is someone's going to fix all this, right? By various people, it's pretty clear that we're not going to be the ones to fix this. And so what do they say? There's going to be some kind of enter into history to fix all this. And that, of course, as it ferments a little while, becomes the fine wine of Messianism. That some person, or persons, by the way, early Messianism never agreed about how many would be two messiahs. And one of those would die, right? And another one would become a military general and win. So ancient Judaism was never clear about there being just one messiah. Many sections of Judaism actually believe there would be at least two. So, right? Now the Christians sticks that by like having him die and come back later. So just picking on that last one. So they can roll into one dude, which is pretty smart. Also, there's all kinds of anti-messiah characters, right? If you have a good guy fighting for the good guys, you're going to have a bad guy fighting for the bad guys. That's anti-Christ. And there are lots of different stories about bad guys, right? Christianity really likes bad guys too. And they make for good guys. The structure of heaven and hell is going to be a big part of the apocalyptic world. If they're going to describe to you where you're going to go when you die or when you get resurrected, they want you to know about it. And if there's really vivid depictions of the hellish worlds and the afterlife, it's pretty motivating. Like, I don't want to go there where they like boil you in excrement forever. That sounds bad. I don't want to go. I'm going to be a good guy. Like, so they're very interested in the structures of the various heavens and the hells, and they're also interested in the idea that behind the scenes of what's apparent to us, the world is actually being dominated by a vast majority of spiritual creatures. Typically, we now know them as angels and demons. And so, again, if you look at the Hebrew Bible, there are basically very little in terms of angels and demons. They kind of show up from time to time, right? But in the apocalyptic, they are everywhere. Angels and demons are literally all around you, engaging in titanic spiritual warfare for the destiny of the world. Right? And right? Michael's the angel of this country, Gabriel's the angel of this country, and every country has their own demon, etc. So the scale of things is also bigger. In Israelite literature, they kind of don't like the Egyptians, and they kind of don't like the Assyrians. But you never have a global analysis of the world, because they're kind of a parochial people. The writers are not parochial. They imagine the entire world divided into countries, and they explain political science in terms of this spiritual battles that are going on behind the scenes that we don't see. Their literature, which we'll talk about more in just a moment, is typically pseudo-anonymous, although they like to claim that very ancient wrote them. So Enoch or Abraham wrote this, or Shem, right, wrote this. So they like to allege ancient authorship, because, you know, it's just like Manasseh, the dude down the street, wrote this. Who cares, right? Like, Manny wrote a book about angels. Oh, yeah, Manny, the guy that like fixed their shoes. Like, the hell does Enoch, right? So being a shoe guy, Manny was like, Enoch wrote this, right? And so he puts Enoch's name on it, right? Patriarch who never died and was like, you know, Noah's grandfather, whatever. Noah's father's like, yeah, Enoch, that dude, yeah, he was real. Let's read his book, right? So you throw a name like Abraham on there, people will read your book. They're not going to read Manny about the end of the world. No one cares what Manny did. So let's talk about this literature, right? Let's get into what makes this work, right? Why would anyone write all this stuff down? Well, the first is historical and psychological. You're living as Judahites in a world of theological and political turmoil, right? Now, I don't know about you. I don't like turmoil. And when my life is in turmoil, one of the things I try to figure out is, why is this happening to me? Right? Because we think, because we're stupid, that if we understand something, we get power over it. You don't. Right? You can be real smart, and they basically just like throw you into a jail or whatever, right? But if bad things are happening to you, you want to understand why. There's no person I don't think of, right? You can be as existentialist as the day is long, right? And you're still going to want to know what's going on. Why is it happening? Right? Why is this happening? Very few people are going to suffer through immense, like, physical and psychological turmoil and think, okay, guess that just happened. Right? Most people don't do that. So what do? They try to explain why it's happening. Further, right? Not only do they want to explain why it's happening, they want to feel like it's not for no reason. No one likes the idea that you just went through a traumatic and it's meaningless. You're on a rock free from the sun, in the middle of a void, and in 4 billion years, the sun's going to swallow this planet, and every bad thing that's ever happened to you is not only not going to be a memory, this Earth won't even exist. We don't want to, that doesn't make sense from a human perspective. We want to understand why our traumas are happening. We want traumas to mean something. And so, what do they mean? Well, the overwhelming data we get from the apocalyptic literature is that God has planned every single thing that's happening in the world. So this is a very deterministic literature, and that your suffering is not random. It's part of a plan. And what's that plan? The end of the world. Right? The world is in a very specific direction and going to make things right. Punishing the wicked, rewarding the righteous. This is all part of the plan. I think also Nietzsche a lot tonight. What's wrong with me? Right? And I think Nietzsche said, right, that the person who has a why can endure any how. Right? The person that has a why can endure any how. People can get through anything as long as they have a reason why it's happening to them. Right? I think I may have it backwards. Right? And so the idea here, right, is that basically what you get is you get a reason why it's happening to you. And what's the reason? It's all part of a plan. And the apocalypticist has been revealed that plan. Lastly, the entire whole drama is that no one likes being colonized. No one likes being oppressed. No one likes having their country destroyed by foreigners. No one likes foreigners moving into their country and taking all their stuff and enslaving them. No one's really about that. That's bad. And so you want to protest against it, right? You want to protest. When the French in Algeria destroy that country, Algerians like, we ain't having it, right? And they protest against it. Now, there are a lot of different ways you can protest. One way of protesting is militarily trying to fight the Russians. You can try that. And people did. And they had very limited success. You can also write books about how they're bad, and God hates them, and God's going to eventually. Now, again, as I said earlier, you can't come out and just write that way, right? Boo the Romans, Tiberius sucks, God's going to kill him. And the Romans going to be like, that's interesting, how would you like to be crucified, right? So they're not going to do that. They're going to encode it. And if you know, you know, right? Hamamin Yamin, right? If you know, you know. If anyone who knew how to read this literature could read the code. They're like, yeah, the Romans, they don't get their ass. But it's God to whoop their ass. They're like, yeah. And the Romans are like, what are you reading? Right? So that was a way of encoding this. And how does all this work? God has to reveal to you the plan. You, the apocalyptic prophet. And that's what this literature is. It's the plan. It's the way the world is structured. God built the world. God structured the world. History itself is unfolding according to very set rules set down by God. Everything is part of the plan. Everything's part of the plan. And the apocalyptic literature like that reveals that uncovering. As you might imagine, in a world of turmoil, which I know Jewish people go through turmoil, right? Every once in a while, there's a little turmoil here and there, right? A little turmoil. You can imagine this was an incredibly persuasive form of religion. It explained why the world was the way it was. It described why bad things were happening. It told you where it all came from. It tells you how it's going to all end. And it tells you that the things that you're going through as a people, as an individual, are not random. And they're not punishment from God. Right? Also, the only punishment from Yahweh. Right? No. You're suffering, that's part of the plan, in which you're always secretly collaborating and going to whoop these people. That idea, I don't know about you, right, is one of the most seductive ideas imaginable. And again, when I track this on the things, like, again, folks may know I wrote my works. It's difficult to read much Marxist propaganda as anything other than repackaged apocalypse, right? It reads very much like an apocalyptic literature, right? Evil emerged with various modes of production, right? It's being driven forward by history, and eventually it's going to come to a cataclysmic battle, and after that, everything's going to be great, right? Dictatorship or whatever. You're like, didn't we heard this already, right? But Marx is like, it's material now, son. It's not God doing it. It's history. So you can see how influential this has been. The apocalyptic form of literature flourished for hundreds of years. One could even argue for 1,000 years, beginning roughly about 350 BCE and extending all the way through the Middle Ages, honestly, right? Because you have Jews with the turmoil, they continued. And so the apocalyptic literature kept being produced. Christianity is in many ways an apocalyptic religion. It's a religion that more forcefully accepts the apocalyptic paradigm than any other form of Judaism, with the exceptions of the Essenes. Those folks looking at Qumran, the Dead Sea Scrolls, they believed it so much, by the way, that when the Jews revolted against the Romans, the folks that lived at that site, this can be trusted to do anything other than make Josephus look good, they fought. They thought the world was about to come to its final end. They tried to organize the resistance to the Romans. They were massacred in 2 battles, and guess what? They stored all their scrolls in the caves near their buildings, and they never came back for them. Why? Because they were dead, because they thought this was all part of the plan. Lucky for us, scrolls sat there more or less for a couple thousand years, and now we have them. And we can even see in the literature where they're planning for this battle, even describing the banners and they will be blowing and carrying in the battle. And I bet you, when that legion of Roman soldiers were like, why are they blowing horns and stuff, right? And that's going to work. And then the Romans massacred them, and they left their scrolls there. Apocalypse is a hell of a drug. I mean, like, when you literally believe God's going to intervene last moment to save you, if that battle plan is stay hooked, right? If that's your strategy, and that was their strategy, it seems. Many of the big books of the Hebrew Bible, like the book of Daniel, is imbued with apocalypticism. The War Scroll and the Dead Sea Scrolls is a very apocalyptic text. Perhaps the most famous apocalyptic text of all time is the Book of Enoch, a book not included in either Christian or Jewish literature, but preserved by the people of Ethiopia, who have never been colonized, FYI, because they fought like devils to have it not happen, and they're brilliant tacticians. But they preserve all these writings that are so important in Judaism. So anytime I think about what the Ethiopian people have done to preserve writings, I am enormous thanks for what they've done. So what's going to also happen, and we'll get to this next time, is that apocalypticism is also going to give rise to a new form of mysticism called the Merkaba mysticism, which we'll be discussing next time. How do you get this vision? How do you go see what God has to show you? Or what angels have to show you? Well, spiritual technique developed for this, and a new subset of apocalypticism in which mystics describe going into God's palaces and being shown this stuff. We'll get to them next week. It's scary. As you might imagine, that's what teenagers. Apocalyptic Judaism, right, and rabbinical Judaism, however, the rabbis never fully embraced apocalypticism, right? Because the rabbis are all about the day-to-day keeping on of religious survival, not the titanic battle at the end, right? The rabbis are more like, how do we do Judaism now the temple is destroyed? How do we move the temple in? And the apocalyptic out there being like, God's going to judge you people tomorrow, right? In many ways, apocalyptic Judaism was never quite meshed with rabbinical Judaism. And again, one famous quote from the Talmud, right? It says that for every time you try to calculate when the Messiah will come, God's the coming of the Messiah is to calculate it in the future. The rabbis don't like this, right? When Rabbi Akiva said, right, that Shimon bar Kokhba is the Messiah will save us all, the other rabbis make fun of him. They're like, grass will grow in your cheeks before the Messiah comes. Like, that's not going to happen. Unfortunately, grass didn't grow in his cheeks. He did get buried because he was burned alive for supporting Bar Kokhba rebellion. So, times history to me. The apocalyptic is very, very dangerous. But it was incredibly popular. On the screen right now is a short list of all the apocalyptic literature from this time period. If I were to grab my collection of apocalyptic literature shelf, it would be longer than the Hebrew Bible. An enormous amount of literature, right, was produced in the apocalyptic genre. Dozens of books that were very popular. For instance, at the Dead Sea Scrolls, there are more copies of the book of Enoch than there are copies of Leviticus. That's Torah, folks. That's like the Torah. The Torah. There are more copies of the book of Enoch there, right? They're more interested in Enoch. If we can take the amount of scrolls they had, right, as any indication. So the apocalyptic literature was incredibly important. And even with the rise of Christianity, it didn't stop being produced. We have dozens of Christian apocalyptic texts, right, including the Apocalypse of John, but other ones. You might be asking why. Well, Jesus has that pesky habit of not coming back soon enough. And Christians underwent turmoil too. They were being persecuted by the Roman Empire. They were being marginalized by the Jewish people that didn't really like them. They thought they were weird. They faced their own turmoil. Jesus wasn't coming back. Well, what do with people dying and Jesus not coming back here? Well, we invent further and further apocalyptic ideas about what's going on. And the persecutions are all part of the plan. Right? Martyrdom becomes a thing you should rush into because it's part of God's plan. Right? Part of God's plan. Of course, also in the Islamic literature, apocalypticism would also become enormously influential, and many apocalyptic Christian and Jewish ideas also make their appearance in the Quran. The Dajjal is a good example of a sort of antichrist character, the Battle of Gog and Magog, a main battle at the end of the world, which occurs in the book of Daniel and is translated into the book of the Battle of Megiddo. And Christian literature, even the return of Jesus and the resurrection of the dead, these are all apocalyptic ideas that also occur in Islam. So Islam is also deeply influenced, and in some sense, an apocalyptic religion in itself. Judaism is going to increasingly abandon apocalypticism. And the answer for that is the same answer why the book of Maccabees is not included in the Bible. The rabbis, right? And also, by the way, why the Hanukkah festival is not about the Maccabees, it's about a miracle. The reason why? Disastrous rebellion after disastrous rebellion. The rabbis didn't want any more Rambos. They were tired of that machismo. We're going to fight the Roman stuff because it just got us killed. Imagine, this apocalyptic literature really gears people up to do rather extreme things. Right? Just because, again, they all think it's part of the plan, and God's going to intervene in history and do whatever. And it doesn't happen. Over and over and over again, it doesn't come to pass. But the rabbis don't like this, they think it's dangerous, and they marginalize it. And eventually rabbinical Judaism, right, moves past apocalyptic literature, and very little of it gets produced. Well, not so much. Very little gets produced in the aftermath of the 135 rebellion by Bar Kokhba, but there is some, right? There are some texts that do get produced, like the Apocalypse of the 10 Signs, and Perkem Mashiach, and things like this. So the literature does survive a little bit longer. Just to wrap up for tonight, folks, needless to say, apocalypticism as a mode of religiosity, I would argue is the most enduring mode of religiosity.
Shout out to G. Oster Funny.
So enduring that apocalyptic ideas have entered even into things like Buddhism, right? Apocalyptic ideas falling from this tradition have entered even into Hinduism. Om Sharingo is a good example of an apocalyptic quasi-Buddhist sect. You may remember them for having poisoned the subway system in Japan with sarin gas in the 1990s as part of an apocalyptic agenda. To this day, in a 2012 poll, nearly 15% of people worldwide believe the world will end in their lifetime. That's millions of people, folks. That's hundreds of millions of people that believe the world's going to end in their lifetime. That's an apocalyptic idea, right? And apocalyptic sects are a huge part of American religiosity. One can think of the Branch Davidians out there in Waco, Texas, and other kinds of things. And again, of course, those folks. Part of the reason what motivated them to stay in that building was an apocalyptic understanding of history. And of course, that probably led to them being massacred by the U.S. government. They had their own hand to play in it too, but I do think that was pretty significant mismanagement. Anyway, well, rabbinical Judaism and Kabbalah are going to win the day over and against apocalypticism. Apocalypticism was enormously important over the course of about 500 years in Judaism specifically, and it has made an enormous impact on world religiosity. I might even argue, like I said earlier, that apocalypticism as a mode of religiosity is perhaps the dominant religious mode in the world today. Right? I would be willing to make that argument, I think. But what's going to emerge in terms of mysticism for the purposes of our learning together is that a form of practical apocalypticism, that is to say, a mysticism in which mystics attempt to descend into the throne room of God, is going to emerge out of the apocalyptic literature. And that form of mysticism is going to be what we'll be tackling next week, called Merkava mysticism. Merkava, chariot mysticism. You also may know the word Merkava because the Israelis have named a tank their equivalent of the M1 Abrams after the chariot of God, which just seems inappropriate for a lot of reasons. But at any rate, what I want to put on the screen right now are just some recommended readings. If you want to grab these ISBNs, and I also want to share these slides with everybody for the class so you can have access to the slides later. But if you want a great apocalyptic literature reader, it's just a collection of apocalyptic literature, this is a really great text by Reddish. The large scholar of apocalypticism in the world now is John J. Collins. His book, The Apocalyptic Imagination, is the definitive study of apocalypticism. It's the book, right? If you take a college-level class on apocalypticism, you'll be reading Collins' book. If you're interested in Christian apocalypticism, Bernard McGinn, the leading scholar in Christian mysticism, has written a really great book about apocalyptic traditions in the Middle Ages. People like Joachim Fior, who's nuts in the most amazing way possible. And of course, also John Reeves has published another text on trajectories in Near Eastern apocalypticism, and this actually covers Jewish apocalypticism through the Middle Ages, which doesn't get much play, mostly because a lot of it's not been translated, but Reeves provides a great introduction to that literature, which is also forms of apocalypticism that survived into Jewish apocalypticism that survived the Middle Ages. So, again, another form of mysticism that emerges from the breakdown of prophecy, but renovates prophecy to do a phenomenologically different task. To show rather than tell, and show what? The whole plan of the universe and how you, as a Jew, right, or as a non-Jew, maybe as a Roman, how you fit into it, right? And that form of mysticism, I think, is just incredibly important. Christianity, I mean, we all see these Christian folks that are predicting the world or whatever. None of this is imaginable without the apocalyptic turn in Judaism during beginning in the 4th century. Welcome back, and thank you for joining me as I
Right? Think of experimental in areas of morality, where there are so many types. There are certain forbidden relationships which normal people don't have desires for. So which means even in the same area, even in the same prohibitions, I can be a tzaddik in certain areas. So the tzaddik said, will say, what this means is, in any given moment in life, this is how the Muhammad says, in any given moment in life, I am simultaneously a tzaddik, and I may also be a rasha. I may also be a rasha. Simultaneously a tzaddik and a rasha. And realize this idea, the Indian said, the Koshi, the tzaddik, Rakha Davar Echatovar, God in the Gadi Sharing Young Nefshat Rasha, and this idea that in one area I can be treated as a tzaddik. Like in many other areas I am like a rasha. That fresh Hasa Parash, but we do shut the window. Once over here, we'll say in very. Once over here. And we'll actually, we're going to stop over here for a second. We'll stop with this because I want to be able to start that much. Those that we just point out, red roof is this dramatic new idea. That a person can simultaneously be a tzaddik and a rasha in the same type of thing. It's a new definition. A tzaddik, when you think about it, is a very term. So tzaddik refers to, tzaddik is not as much my definition of my entire persona as much as it defines my relationship to certain activities. So certain Avedas as a tzaddik, there's certain Avedas as a certain Avedas on a tzaddik. No type of no desire for it, no shyness for it. I don't do it. I don't struggle with it. I don't stumble with it. I don't desire it. I'm a tzaddik in those areas. Other areas I transgress. After a state of transgression, I think I'm shalom. But again, if I do tshuva, then I'm about tshuva. Those are the most interesting about this. That's all this stuff. According to the approach of that, I would say that a person after faith is almost like a person in recovery. It never speaks to a person in recovery. It's an amazing thing. How vulnerable a person in recovery is, never what? If you see people in recovery, no one actually knows people don't usually say, I'm recovered. Instead they say, I'm 365 months, whatever. I'm sober this amount of time. It's incredibly sort of so profound because what recovery from addiction really is this idea is, this is my reality. This is something I will contend with the rest of my life. Is my reality. My goal is just to go ahead and stretch sobriety for as long as I can. This time experience is the same thing with faith. It's the same exact thing with faith. I'm in recovery. Why? Because my struggles are my struggles. That's it. The areas in which I struggle. If you think about this in life, it's not usually the shout that I struggle in one area, and then that struggle goes totally away. And kadosh all the time, like new struggle, nothing to do with the old struggle. That's not usually what happens. If we're honest with ourselves, the things we struggle with internally, very often are the very things we struggle with internally. All the same stuff. It manifests itself differently in our life, but it's all the same thing. So that's something. In your areas of struggle, you never lose sadness. I have no shyness in this particular case. I come up to it. And that's okay. That's incredible. I don't have to become excited in the areas of my struggle. All I have to do is go ahead and swim along, swim together, in so long amount of sobriety. Yeah, I know. So stop over here today. This I'm going to tell you, this piece is life altering. This is the way we look at ourselves, we look at our struggles, and we look at our areas of weakness and strength.
You're fine. Go fuck yourself.